This morning, I'm excited for this message. It was fun to prepare. I don't know if you ever had thought of that, but for me it is. It was fun to prepare, to be digging into the text and see what God is doing, bringing us through the book of Acts to understand He had a plan, folks, all along. He had a plan of how to get the hope that there was in who Jesus is, but to the entire world. And we get to see how that is accomplished. And we've seen all along, we've been tracking in the last few weeks with Paul. This week, or this last week, we saw that Paul was in front of, it was the king of the time, and he was standing before Agrippa, and he was connecting with that leader because he kept kind of making reference, I already know you know this, or, the prophets and Moses, I know that you believe, is the statement he made about Agrippa, kind of locking him into having to say, yeah, actually I do, because I'm sort of the king, and so he was trying to help them understand, I'm just preaching what they told about of old. And so that's what Paul was saying. And the end was, they determined, he's guiltless. There's nothing to charge him with, except for that he'd already appealed to Caesar. And it was an interesting statement at the very last of that chapter, was that Paul could have gone free because there was nothing to charge him with, except that he had appealed to Caesar to have the charges heard by the highest in the world at the time before Caesar. So we ended that last week where the statement was, well, he could have been let free, but we have to send him anyway. So what we get to look into is, how does that go? So the title of the message this week is, You Should Have Listened to Me. Now, you might have seen it on the board out front, or you saw it in your stuff this morning. That's a phrase that no one likes to hear, right? You should have listened to me, and maybe you've heard it before. I don't know. Maybe moms or dads, you've used it. It's kind of fun to say when you're in that position. Should have listened to me. So we're going to see that, again, as I like to do, this statement is literally pulled straight out of the text of this morning. So we're going to see how that's in there. Verses 1 and 2 we see in Acts 27. When it was decided that we should set sail for Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. Embarking in a ship of Adramyttium, which was about to set sail for the ports along the coast of Asia, we put to sea and accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica. Okay, so again, we're kind of going to get back into Paul's on another trip. Now, this is not a missionary journey. He is a prisoner. But you'll see how they've treated him differently, because he's a different kind of prisoner. He's an innocent man, already been determined to be innocent by multiple different people, but he appealed to Caesar, so we still have to kind of do that. So that's what we see here. So this is the context. They're sailing for Rome. Paul is under the authority of this guy named Julius. And we see in verse 2, the ship is from Adramyttium. When you first read that, it's like, what? What is that? That sounds like an element, or the kind of thing that you give to a superhero and he becomes Captain America or something, you know what I mean? Or the Wolverine, right? Adramyttium, that's what they injected into my body, and now my bones are of steel. Adramyttium, well, it's a place, actually. It's a spot we're going to take a look at. And we also see that the ship is going to sail what they call along the coast of Asia with Paul, is this guy named Aristarchus, which we hear about. And also, there's another person in the boat. Who do you think is with them? Luke. Because it says, and when it was decided that we should set sail for Italy. There are a few indicators throughout this book. The author is Luke, by the way. We already knew that. There's only about 4 or 5 different places where he throws in there this wording. And you'll see throughout, he says, we. He's there. Now, he's the author, so he's not just recording and they told me about this event, and here's what they told me it was like. He was literally there on the boat. So don't forget that we get a lot of detail. What I love about this chapter is there's some incredible detail. It's also one of the only chapters that has as much detail about the nautical world of that time than this one. And we're going to see it. Now, if you don't understand boats and anything nautical, then, okay, you're going to learn a couple things. But it's kind of fun. It uses language that is specifically in the world of shipping and sailing and nautical travel. So it's kind of fun. Now, we're going to take a look at the map, because as you know, I like the map. Well, this is a new map we get to look at because it's now going to go from, here's Jerusalem down here. Of course, here's Egypt. This is North Africa. So they're going to go from the little city that we've been in for a while now, Caesarea, and going to start traveling up and around. And so as he's describing what they're going to do is they're going to take this boat. Now, the boat is from a little place. Now, this is now called Asia here. Adramyttium. There's the name of the boat. The boat's not named Adramyttium. It's from, or a boat of Adramyttium, meaning that's where it was from. So that's where the boat normally would be or coming from. And very likely would have been its destination. The plan was for the boat that he's on to go to Adramyttium, up there. See it? Up in there. Now, we've been with Paul as he went up through here. There's Ephesus. They traveled up here to Philippi, Thessalonica. He's been down here to Corinth and back around by land. But this time, he's going to be going by boat. He has no power on this trip. He is, again, he's one of the prisoners in a way. And so the plan is to go up. Now, the boat was from Adramyttium, originally, likely heading in that direction, to go up and around and kind of a safe harbor route to get to where? Italy. Okay, so we're tracking now. Have you ever been on a doomed voyage? So, you don't know it's doomed, right? Or otherwise you wouldn't have got on the boat. But if you've ever been on a vessel on the water, there are some things out of your control, right? Now, the boat might be under your control until suddenly it's not. But there's this thing called weather that can come and really change everything. I have had boats. I have a little boat. I've been on the water a number of times, and I will actually be sharing with you a couple of stories along the way here about some of the things I've done or been a part of on the water. It is a blast. It's a lot of fun to be on a boat. There's a little bit of risk at times, and then there's times when you are really in danger. So just be aware. All right, verses 3 through 5, we're going to see. It says, the next day we put in at Sidon. So we know there was a journey, and then they end up there to Sidon. Julius treated Paul kindly and gave him leave to go to his friends and be cared for. And putting out at sea from there, we sailed under the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against us. When we had sailed across the open sea along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra in Lycia. Now, when you and I normally read the Bible, whether you are a great student or not, you're going to have to crack open a map in your back of your Bible. A lot of your study Bibles have one, because those are not familiar to us all that much, right? We're like, not lots of names, I get lost in it, but it's really fascinating today, and it should be, hopefully for you, because of this whole journey. So let's take a look at the map again. Now, it's telling us what happened was they were in Sidon, so they land from Caesarea to Sidon. Now, when he's in Sidon, they allow him to get off the ship and go visit some friends in town. And they care for him, maybe fed him. They may have provided some things that would have made it more comfortable for him because he's been in prison, in jail, sort of, in Caesarea. Even though it was nice, they cared for him. It was really kind of cool. This guy let him go and be with, this Julius guy, let him be with some friends. So they leave from Sidon, and they're heading up. But what happens is they take what's called the lee side of the island of Cyprus, and the lee side is this side down here on the bottom. So lee is not south. Lee is a nautical term for the side of a landmass that has less wind. There's the windward side and the lee side. So they are, how many of you know they don't have gas engines yet, right? All right. So you can't just power your way through the wind. I've done it. I've been there. It can make things pretty exciting. But if all you have is the wind, you kind of got to pay attention to which way it's blowing so you can figure out how to get from point A to point B. Point A was Sidon. So they have to take the lee side of Cyprus, which is the southern side. They take the wind would be blowing this direction this time of year, from the north down the south. That's called a northern wind, meaning from the north to the south. So they were taking this side to get out of the wind, and then they sailed across the sea, the open sea, over to here, to Myra in Lycia. So you're seeing the names of those words in your text. That's actual places. That's where they were. So you kind of wonder, well, why do you go to Myra this way? Wouldn't it have been like maybe safer to just kind of putt around up in here and to get over to there? Well, they started out, and as the wind picked up, they took the careful side of Cyprus and then headed straight up here to Myra to get there. And the main thing here we're seeing is the wind. Rain is not such a big deal when you're on the water, unless you don't know how to remove the water out of your boat by bailing it out or having ways for it to get away. But it's the wind. So they're having an issue right now already because it says that verse 4, wind was against us. Wind against you is not just because it's blustery, it's pushing in a direction that makes it hard to go in that direction. If they're trying to go north and the wind's blowing in your face, it's hard to go. So you have to start tacking. To tack means you're turning your boat one way, and the wind will push you a little bit that way. Then you tack and go again the other way, and you're going kind of zigzagging to get in the direction of the wind. It's not that easy. It's kind of hard. Their boats were wooden. They were heavy, depending on what they had for their mainmast and the sails. It could have been tough going, and it was. So verses 6 to 8. There, the centurion found a ship of Alexandria. So we already know that the other ship was called by a name where it was from. So this is a ship from Alexandria sailing for Italy and put us on board. Now they're transferring from one boat to another. We sailed slowly for a number of days and arrived with difficulty off Cnidus, and the wind did not allow us to go further. We sailed under the lee of Crete off Salmone. Coasting along it with difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Havens, near which was the city of Lycia. So we're still just looking at text that gives us this trip. It'd be like saying, well, we went for a drive, but the pass was closed, so we had to go the southerly route through Portland and along the gorge and then up to Spokane, which we've actually had to do before. So that's kind of what he's saying. We were heading in a direction, but the wind pushed us. In fact, we changed boats, and we're in a different ship, and then it sailed like this. So once again, I want us to take a look at this journey. As you saw, they were heading north, but it's here at Myra they changed boats. And it says it took them many days until they ended up in Cnidus, this little tiny point out there. But because the wind was blowing north to south so badly, they couldn't continue in the direction. They want to get there to Italy. That's the straightest route, just going whoop like that. Well, the wind pushed them so hard, they ended up going like directly south, kind of the opposite way they're trying to go. And they ended up going to what was, again, the lee side of Crete, and they end up in a little place called Fair Havens, a little city that's there called Lycia. It kind of makes me laugh a little bit. Fair Havens. It sounds like a retirement home. We ended up in Fair Havens, and they had nice lunch and Jell-O, and it was good. Anyhow, so they end up in this place. He's telling us about this travel. But don't miss out on why it's important. You're like, for one, remember, Luke's on the boat. But why is this important that he's telling us? Constantly he's saying a phrase. Winds were against us in verse 4. The verse 7, it said the wind did not allow us to go further, so we sailed under the lee of Crete. The wind did not allow us. What does the Bible compare the wind to? Just thought of this while I was studying it. I'm like, just look into it a little bit. What does the Bible compare the wind to? The Holy Spirit. So as the Bible compares the wind to the Holy Spirit, it made me think, is the storm a sign of God's displeasure or of him guiding? Because he had a plan for them to go in a different direction for his own reasons. It's just an interesting observation. He keeps giving the credit to the new direction they were given and the transfer into a different boat, potentially, because of the wind. The wind would not allow us to go further. They're at the full mercy of the wind. Now, who do we know is the Lord of even the wind and the rain? Now, you might look at it and just go, Well, whoever the captain was did a bad job of planning. Well, actually, this time of year, this direction of wind is actually quite normal. So they kind of would have known there's going to be some wind. But this was some serious wind. So I thought maybe we could look at just how do we apply some of this. Is the storm a sign of God's displeasure, or is it him directing and guiding? Now, there was a time when Jesus was being questioned by a Pharisee named Nicodemus, and he was talking about being born again, and how can you be born again? And he was thinking more physically than he was spiritually. And Jesus was trying to explain a few things to him, but one of the things that Jesus says in John 3:8 says this: "The wind blows where it wishes, and you hear its sound, but you do not know where it comes from or where it goes. So it is with everyone who's born of the Spirit." The Spirit moves and does what the Spirit's going to do. And in this story, we actually have the wind literally doing that. And I just wanted to draw a comparison of how there are times in our life when we have a plan. I'm going from Caesarea to Rome. And I don't know about you, maybe your husbands, maybe it's you, or you're like me. I like to go in a straight line. I don't like zigzagging. I don't like to waste a left turn, right turn. If I'm going there, let's just go there. Kind of like from the couch to over here in the living room, I don't want to have to zigzag between stuff. I like to, it may look pretty, it may look cool. I just want to go straight to the kitchen for the refrigerator and not have to trip over 5 things. I don't know, maybe it's just me. But anyhow, that would have been pretty much the plan, except that God had, or the wind had, a different plan. Pushing them off course, pushing them away from the easy, direct route. Are you being led by the Holy Spirit? I mean, you might say, well, I'm a Christian, I believe that. I believe the Holy Spirit leads me and guides me. Could the difficult path that you are on or that you've been on not be about his displeasure in you, but he's got a plan, and he's just moving you around through it. And the difficulty you have is the Holy Spirit leading you or guiding you. Maybe the path you're on, even though it might be difficult, is something greater than you thought it was. Our author is sitting on that boat, and he's writing about the wind and how its effect on what they're doing. It doesn't get better, by the way. We're not done yet. We got a few minutes. Oh, look at that. I got a few minutes left. I think we naturally interpret difficulty. We naturally interpret the things we run across as a sign of sin or failure or God's displeasure in us. When you run into something, when you have something you wanted to do, you prayed about it, and then, okay, I cannot go any further. I've got to go to the lee side of this thing. We do often do that. However, the Bible would say, I don't know, the entire book of Job, that stuff just happens, whether you're sinful or not. That can be true. There can be stuff that's going on in your life that you're not really all that happy about, but it's not that God hates you. In fact, in Matthew 5, Jesus preaching the Sermon on the Mount says, he makes his sun rise on evil and on good. He sends rain on the just and the unjust and the Pacific Northwest. Actually, rain is so good for us. But we look at it, and our first thing is, God hates me. I've done something wrong. I need to figure out what it is so that I can relieve what's happening. But God might be having you on a path or for a purpose. You don't have to always understand it. But be careful to immediately assume that. So, what difficulty are you walking through right now? How have you been interpreting it? Because I don't think it's fair for us to believe that it's only God's displeasure. Are there times that God shows his displeasure in us or our sin and reveals it and makes things hard? True, yes, he does do that. I'm not saying he doesn't. But we often only go there. And in this is actually where Paul's supposed to be going. God told him, you're going to go to Rome. You're supposed to go to Rome. But they're on a route that doesn't make any sense. And it's the wind that's guiding them. What path are you on right now? And how have you been interpreting it? Okay, verses 9 and 10. Since much time had passed, and the voyage was now dangerous because even the fast was already over, Paul advised them. Now remember, they're in Fairhaven Harbor, okay? They're in that little place on the Christmas million movies they have. What do they call those again? The Hallmark, the Hallmark store is what I was thinking of. The Hallmark version of a sailing ship. They arrive in harbor, and there's a beautiful fair maiden who comes, and she's running a little bookshop, and the sailor falls in love, and they end up getting married and having a Christmas there somehow. That's not going to happen in Fairhaven, okay? But they're in Fairhaven. But since so much time has passed and the voyage is dangerous, Paul tells them this in verse 10. He says, "Sirs, I perceive that the voyage will be with injury and much loss, not only of the cargo and the ship, but also our lives." So I love that he says this. He says, it's the season that has already passed. When it's the capital F for fast means it's a certain specific time of year. This was in the fall. It would have been roughly September, October, so about this time of year, and it's past that now. The weather on the Mediterranean becomes like they're experiencing and just is constant. So he's saying, we've missed the easy season. So I perceive the voyage is going to be with injury and loss, not just the cargo and the ship, but our lives. Now, who here likes the king of the obvious? Anybody here? You like that person? You're in a group of people, and it hasn't been going good, and the person gets out and goes, "Wow, I think we're lost." Everyone knows you're lost. Someone, shut that guy up because he's really annoying. Well, that's Paul right now. They all know. Now, Paul has traveled. I'm sure he's done his fair bit. We already know he's been on a boat a few times. He's with sailors, and he's telling them, it's not looking good. And they're like, "Yeah, thanks a lot for that, king of the obvious." So, point number one is this. They're sailing for Italy. We find that it's Paul, this guy Aristarchus, not really mentioned much, but his name is in there, and then Luke. They're embarking for Rome. Winds force a change of boat and direction, and Paul warns them. So here's the application for us this morning. Be aware, missions are flexible. If you've never been on a missions trip, you've got to be just prepared to make changes along the way. Because there are times when God has another plan. You figured we're going to do this, and then that happens. We're going to hear from Tyler and Paige probably in another week or so about their trip that they just came back from in Uganda. And I know because I saw their updates that they had certain plans, and then things got changed on them. You know what you do? You pivot. Okay, we're going to have to go over here. You find some other thing. God maybe opened up something for you that is even better than what your original plans are. So missions are flexible, but also listen to warnings. Now, Paul is a man of God. He's giving them a warning. You hope they listen to it. Sometimes someone comes into your life and they bring you warning. It wouldn't hurt to just give some pause. Maybe they are being king of the obvious. They're saying something to you, I already knew that. Well, maybe it's God's confirmation, but it might be good. Listen to warnings. And the last one, look for God's hand in circumstances, because at times we attribute it again to God's displeasure, and it might be him just saying, I actually want you to go this way. I've got a plan. There's a reason. You don't get to know it yet, but there's a reason. So we need to be aware, because this wasn't their main plan, and yet they're having to follow it because the wind won't let them go the way they wanted to go. All right, verses 11 and 12. But, so he says this, right? He says, king of the obvious. I think we're all in danger. This is a nice little place. They call it Fairhaven for a reason. It's on the lee side of where we're at. No. The centurion paid more attention to the pilot and the owner of the ship than to what Paul said. And because the harbor was not suitable to spend the winter in, the majority decided to put out to sea from there on the chance that somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, facing both southwest and northwest, and spend the winter there. Okay, so we have Paul's warning and then what they do with it, okay? So let's take a look at this map once again. It's not a very long distance. It doesn't make much sense. Why would you decide that from the Fair Haven of Lycia, why you wouldn't stay in Fair Haven? They wanted to go to Phoenix. Look how close that looks. There's just this little thing in here that's a little bit of a little indent, and then you just land in the harbor of Phoenix. Now, the difference is they wanted to go to Phoenix because it was a bigger city. It would be better to harbor there or winter there, meaning spend the winter, because there's more people, there's more to do. You're not on the ship anymore. It's in the harbor, and we're going to go to land and hang out. Maybe the bars were better. All the sailors are like, oh yeah, there's more people there. Lycia is this tiny little coastal town with a lot of retired folks who live there. So how much fun is that? I'm just kidding, by the way. But that's what they're saying. They're like, we don't want to stay the winter here. This is too small. And so the people in charge, and the text said the majority, decided, no, we can do this. We're just going a little distance. We're just going from here, Fair Haven, up to Phoenix. So that's what we want to do. So that was the plan. Have you ever been voted out by experts who might later regret their decision? You're the one trying to say, I think we need to be cautious. Oh, don't you worry about it. I've hiked this mountain 4 times before, so let's go. And then you get hit by a snowstorm or something. Things can happen. And so he gets outvoted in a sense. I mean, he was just kind of giving his observations. But what we'll see is interesting. Verses 13 to 15. Now, when the south wind blew gently, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, they weighed anchor and sailed along Crete, close to the shore. But soon a tempestuous wind called the northeaster struck down from the land. And when the ship was caught and could not face the wind, we gave way to it and were driven along. Oh boy. So the plan was they're still going to follow what they thought they would follow. The plan was they were going to get in this thing, they were going to just follow the coast, but what they hadn't been paying attention to is, even though they have a breeze of a southerly wind, it probably was swirling, because just past where they had been in Fair Haven, there's kind of an elevation on the island. And when they got past that, the wind coming from the north, the nor'easter wind coming from the northeast, came down hard, and they could not stay in the direction of that Phoenix, the city or the harbor, and it blew them off course. It blew them off so far they couldn't do anything. A tempestuous wind called the northeaster struck down from the land. And when it got caught up, they couldn't even face the wind. They couldn't get into it. And don't forget, boats, especially again of that time, they're wooden boats. They're fairly heavy, but when you are on the water, there's 2 things that are going to push you around on the water. If you're really low to the water, the wind could probably go over you, wouldn't get pushed. But the higher up the boat is, the sidewalls of your boat, then the sail, will all get pushed by wind. So they are just getting pushed. Even if they were dropping the sails, as much boat might be out of the water, it's going to get pushed by the wind. When I've been on the water, when I go fishing, there is one thing that I just cannot stand, and it's not the rain. It's the wind. Because when you're in a spot, you want to fish, and you know the fish are right there, and you've already started hitting some fish, you don't want the wind to start pushing you off, and now you're over here where there aren't any fish. It's the wind. It moves you around on the water like nothing. Just a little tiny wisp of wind, and you're off course again. This is a tempestuous wind called the northeaster. Verse 13, it seemed like it was calm. It says, so they weighed anchor, which means they brought the anchors up and they began to sail. Started out close to shore, and then they hit this open spot. One of the most dangerous times I've ever been in a boat. Years ago, when Jennifer and I were pastoring the church in Spokane, our church group, a number of us, decided to do a camp out, and we were camping in a place called Evans Creek Campground on Lake Roosevelt, which is actually the upper part of the Columbia River. It's been dammed up by the dam, and it's now a big lake. It's a giant lake, 150-mile long lake, and we're way up at the north end of it, near a place called Kettle Falls. So we had been camping there with our church group, and it was Memorial Day weekend. It was in May, and a spring storm came through, and we didn't know it was coming. So I've got a 16-foot aluminum boat. And I think I have both boys, right? I had Micah and Jack, I think, possibly with me in the boat. We were going to do some fishing with some other friends. They had their boats. We're all just kind of going in a little flotilla, a group of boats going out, having a good time. And this windstorm came in, and it actually was recorded. It was recorded on the news that it came in that area and hit us really hard. But we're on the river, and I'm in a boat. I'm in an aluminum boat. They're not very heavy. And I've got 2 little boys in my boat. They're now grown men. Both of them fathers, but they're little guys. And guys, get your life jackets on. So I think they either had them on already or I made sure they put them on. I grabbed mine and put mine on. We're on a part of the river that's not that big, and there's already white caps starting. The wind is whipping through there. It knocked out trees. It knocked out all the springtime, the yellow pollen out of the evergreen trees or the trees. It was a mess. We're on the water, and there's a couple of boats. There's a boat ahead of me that's more of a fishing boat, and it was fiberglass, heavier boat, more stable, a little longer than mine. And Jim Turk, it was Jim Turk's boat. And I flagged him down. I said, I got to get these boys off my boat. Because if we end up capsizing, how am I going to save them both? It was bad. It was not good. And we were a ways from where there was a marina further down the river, but we couldn't get going very fast. And the choppiness of it, my boat's getting thrown around. I was able to get close enough to his boat. We tied off, and I transferred my boys to the to the boat. The thing was, I'm still in a boat, right? And what a comfort it was that I got to see those little guys and some friends pull away on their boat so we wouldn't hit each other. And we separated so that we could get safely to harbor. But I knew they were okay. Being on the water can be scary. And we made it. It took a few miles, and it took way longer than it should have. And we finally got around a corner where the wind wasn't hitting us, and it calmed way down. It's amazing what can happen. I've experienced being on the lee side of a piece of land on the water because the wind gets pushed away, or it's not even happening there, and all of a sudden it's calm. You're like, man, you can even start fishing again, which I didn't, by the way. But I can tell you, I've been there. It's scary. So you've got to know that these guys are caught in a bad spot. They're in this wind now is driving them along. In a way, because they don't have gas power or electric power, they are being pushed by the only thing that can help them have any direction. It's just shoving them down the Mediterranean. So, verses 16 and 17. Running under the lee of a small island called Cauda, we managed with difficulty to secure the ship's boat. After hoisting it up, they used supports to undergird the ship. Then, fearing that they would run aground on the Syrtis, they lowered the gear and thus were driven along. Remember, any ideas you have of regular boating? This is different because it's only a sailing boat. It's a heavy boat. And very likely, because it's got multiple people aboard and a lot of cargo, what we're talking about is they had difficulty securing the ship's boat. There's a boat that would normally transfer you from the main boat to shore because the big boat doesn't always have a harbor to go into. It secures itself offshore, and then they load materials and things to get it on shore with a little boat. The little boat they were having difficulty with. It normally is just kind of like that tag-along little boat. It was going to get destroyed. So they hoist it up. They're supporting it. They're also undergirding the ship. There's a few ways you can interpret which ship they're supporting. Fearing they would run aground on the Syrtis, they lower the gear. And they were being driven along. So this might be, I think it's the last time we looked at the map. Another look at the map. So we saw from Fair Havens, they were thinking they were going to Phoenix. The wind pushed them off, and they were going west, but southwest. They end up just off this little tiny island, Cauda. But their fear was that they were going to run aground on Syrtis. They were going to literally just get blown straight to North Africa. They were worried that we can't control this. The power of the storm is so much that they're afraid they're going to land North Africa. So again, they go to the lee side of Cauda. They end up going down here to gain a little bit of a break and they're there. But the problem is they've got this boat they need to secure. They've got things it's all becoming a big mess. So they secure the little boat. It says that fearing they would run aground, they lowered the gear and were driven along. The gear they lowered likely would have been the mainsail or the sails in general, because they're still being blown along. It's probably not anchors, because you wouldn't be blown along if you had anchored. So likely, it's what they're talking about. The gear was the different, however many sails there might have been. They've dropped them down to limit how far or how much are being pushed. But it's really scary. They're literally saying, we have so little control here, we have to drop everything and just let the wind push us. That is a hopeless situation. They're in a boat full of cargo and people, and they're pretty much hopeless here. Verse 18 and 19 to 20, I'm sorry. Since we were violently storm-tossed, they began the next day to jettison the cargo. Now, if you're owning the ship and you're traveling along, why are you even on a trip? You're making money because you're transporting things from point A to point B. How bad does it have to be that you're tossing the cargo? They began the next day to jettison the cargo. And on the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. This is the author who's on this trip, and he's just sharing with us what it must have felt like. They start jettisoning the cargo. They are literally throwing money overboard because they're worried about survival. There is a point when you're on a trip when you no longer are worried about where you're going, and you're just hoping to survive. I've actually used that example with what happens in churches. Because many times in churches, we have a direction, we believe this is where we're going, and things happen that aren't good, and things get worse, and things get to a point when we just want to survive. You don't even think about what should we be thinking about? What outreach should we be thinking about, or should we be doing? Because that's in a certain direction. I'm not sure we're going to get there because we got to survive this thing, whatever this thing is. And just because that's what I do as far as church life, I've used that example. That sometimes you give up on thinking, I don't even care where we're going right now. We just have to survive. So they are literally tossing the cargo. And then 3 days later, the ship's tackle. Now, if you're a fisherman like me, you think tackle is your fishing gear, because that's what you call a lot of your fishing gear. It's literally mostly gear. So I Googled ship's tackle, just so you know where I got my information from. It's obviously really reliable. Ship's tackle refers to all gear on a ship for lifting and pulling, particularly rigging, cranes, block and tackle, systems used for tasks like hoisting cargo, adjusting the sails, or assisting with steering. It also can refer to the specific assemblage of ropes and pulleys used to gain mechanical advantage, as well as the ground tackle that is used for anchoring. They're literally taking everything you would use to give you an advantage on a ship to get where you need to go or secure things, because it weighs stuff. It might be getting tossed about, slamming into people, and you're worried it's going to kill us. Somehow we got to save ourselves, so they, by their own hands, are throwing it over. Let's go back to some application here with a question. What is your current condition? In the tempest, the storm, or the situation, the journey you're on, and it feels like you're facing something head on, what is the condition you're in? Have you lost hope of being saved? They had gotten to the point where they had lost hope. It's a condition that we shouldn't be in, but we can be in. Verse 20, they'd lost hope. All hope of being saved was abandoned. Do you have hope right now? Do you still retain or hang on to some hope of making it through this, whatever this journey is you're on, even if you've been blown off your own plans, and maybe God's directing that? Have you lost hope? Point number 2 this morning is this: hopelessly adrift. The centurion, the boat pilot, and the owner, they ignore Paul. They set sail for Phoenix, but the northeaster wind pushes them off, and then they have to basically go into survival tactics to survive. They're trying to find a way to make it through this thing. How do we apply it? Don't bet your life on chances. Early on, it said something about how they believed because there was this gentle southerly wind that there was a chance they could make it to Phoenix. Yeah, be careful betting your life on, this might be a good chance. The sun's breaking just a little bit. Let's go hiking Mount Rainier today. Maybe not a good idea. And don't abandon your hope of rescue. Don't let that happen. We're going to see later more, but don't abandon your hope of rescue. Sometimes that's a condition. That's us in here. That's what we're thinking and how we're feeling. What issue are you close to giving up on? What thing are you close to giving up on? Don't lose hope. Verses 20 and 21. So, since they'd been without food for a long time, Paul stood up among them. Now, here's our good friend Paul. Our champion of the faith, Paul, gets up and he says, "Men, you should have listened to me and not set sail from Crete and incurred this injury and loss." Once again, king of the obvious, he's standing there. I'm just surprised they didn't just throw him overboard with all the stuff. Like, really? Thanks a lot for that. Obvious. So anyhow, you should have listened to me and not set sail from Crete. Verse 22, "Yet, now I urge you, take heart. There will be no loss of life among you, only the ship." So if you're on this journey and he gets up, he's a preacher. You don't think he knows anything about boats. He's saying, "Yeah, you should have listened to me." And then what he says is, "Take heart. Take heart. Don't you worry about it, for there will be no loss of life. We're just going to lose the entire ship." And can you imagine that? I think it's hilarious. I'm surprised, literally, that they didn't throw him overboard. But this has got to be the beginning of one of the worst pep talks you've ever heard. So that was the question of the week of Friday, was what's the worst pep talk you've ever heard? They are throwing things overboard. All the money that they would have made is now at the bottom of the Mediterranean. The equipment they could have used maybe to help them survive, to hold things together, tossed it overboard, and he gets up and says, "We're all going to live, but the ship's not going to make this." That just doesn't seem like the way you encourage people. Even though he started out with "take heart." So Paul continues, and it doesn't really get that much better. Verses 23 to 26. This is, how Paul is. He's a good preacher. He just keeps on going. "For this very night there stood before me an angel of God, of the God to whom I belong and to whom I worship. And he said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has granted you all of those who sail with you.' So," he says to the men, "So take heart, men, for I have faith in God that it'll be exactly as I have been told. But we must run aground on some island." So that's how I take it. So he tells them once again, he's encouraging them, "Don't you worry about it. An angel showed up and told me we're all going to live, except we are going to crash land and end up on an island somewhere." So in my mind, the way my mind works on this, I had to rethink this for the modern context. So we've all been in the most modern, fastest way to get from point A to point B, which is an airplane. Can you imagine being on an airplane? You hear over the intercom, "Ladies and gentlemen," this is your captain speaking, "the storm we are flying through has broken both of our engines. We're now gliding along at 400 miles per hour at 30,000 feet, and we're looking for a place to land. As a precaution, we have jettisoned all of our fuel, all of our equipment, and your luggage. But take heart. There's a preacher on board, and an angel appeared to him while you were in the restroom, and we're all going to live. We're only going to lose the entire airplane. And by the way, we also have to land on some island somewhere." So literally, in a modern context, that would be what they're hearing him say. And I'm sure you would have been encouraged, Would you have been like, all right, we're gonna do this, looking over at the person next to you who you don't really know at all with their earbuds in. And you're like, hey, we're good. And they're like, because of the wind and the storm. Have you been in those where the planes do the thing? Yeah, I've been in a few of them, right? It can be a little scary because you're completely out of control yourself. And now even the one in control says, I have no control. It's just the wind. Interesting. But take heart, because the preacher said so. Verses 27 and 28. When the 14th night had come, wait a minute, that's 2 weeks. When the 14th night had come, as we were being driven along the Adriatic Sea, about midnight, the sailors suspected that they were nearing land. So they took a sounding, and they found 20 fathoms. And a little further on, they took a sounding again. They found 15 fathoms. Those are just measurements. They were figuring, we're getting close to land. So they go down. The first is about 120 feet deep. And then they're at about 90 feet deep. So it means we're getting closer to a landmass somewhere. You're taking depth readings because you can't see where you're going. The wind and the storms are so bad, it's gray. You don't see land anywhere. It's all water, white caps. You think you're dying, but the guys are like, we've been drifting for a while. It's 2 weeks long. They're looking for a few things. They're looking for shore, and they're looking for hope. Because they have no hope so far, but they're like, you know what? Let's check. Oh, wait a minute. I think we are getting closer. So it made me wonder this. When you're in the middle of a storm, how do you test the depths? How do you and I go, maybe God's going to answer this one here. I wonder how. We start looking at evidence. We look for evidence, like, God, I need something, so we start testing the depths. Ooh, I think we're getting closer. And the reason, it's not so much about how we test the depths, but my question is why? Why do we do that? Why do they do that? They're looking for hope. Sometimes we're testing the depths because we're losing faith, or we've lost faith. We've got to give ourselves some external way of comforting ourselves. So we test the depths. Our faith's waning, and maybe we're losing hope. Verses 29 to 32, and this is the last text we have for this morning. Fearing that we might run on the rocks. Remember, he's saying we the whole time because Luke's there. Fearing that we might run on the rocks, they let down 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. And as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship, had lowered the ship's boat into the sea under the pretense of laying out anchors from the bow, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved. So the soldiers cut away the ropes of the ship's boat and let it go. Whoa. So here's something interesting that happens. One of the things that really gets me is that they attach first anchors to the stern of a ship. If you've ever been on a boat, a big no-no, you never put the anchor on the stern of your ship. Well, this ship may have had a pointy rear end, but most of them are square. Your boat should be. Mine is. And if you put the anchor in the stern and the wind's pushing, it pushes the waves and the weather against the back of your boat, causing it to be unstable. And a good friend of mine and I, boat story, Brent Hill, if you were ever watching, my brother, he and I were fishing on a little lake in Medical Lake, Washington. Wind was out, no good fishing. I threw anchor over, and as the wind pushed us, it was I hooked it up to the back, not thinking. And as we're sitting there fishing, we're talking, we got our lines out. We could see over a little rock chuck on the rocks near us because we were right next to this rock ledge, about 80 feet deep. No fish. We're just sitting there talking, eating crackers, and I look over at him, and I look down, and in the bottom of my boat, there's about 3 inches of water already where we're sitting in my boat. It's not a very big boat. The anchor at the stern had been pushed like this because the wind was pushing it, and the water was lapping over the back of my boat, and I didn't know it. The waves were throwing gallons of water in the back of my boat. I look back, and my boat battery, it's a car battery, is almost 2/3 buried in water. There's that much water at the very back of the boat. Anchoring to the stern is not a good idea. And I get some evidence from this. I think that they were claiming that they were going to then go to the front, but they started in the worst place ever, the stern of a boat. Just information for you. I can't explain it, except that this might have been an attempt. I'll just tell you, that's not a good place. You don't anchor to the stern. If you're ever on a river, you anchor to the bow, because the bow is pointed, and the flow of the river, it'll ride the bow. You go the other way, it'll sink you. And there have been many people have died by doing it the wrong way. Now, what it tells us is that fearing that they might run on the rocks, they are planning to abandon ship, and they're going to try and take that boat. They're taking drastic measures. What kind of drastic measures would you have even considered, or have you considered, in the middle of a storm? I don't just mean like a real storm. I mean like storm of your life. What drastic measures have you considered? Sometimes we can get pushed to that, where we need to be careful. Paul warns the whole group. He says, hey, look, we can't let them get off the boat because we all have to be together. God told me we're all going to survive together. So that was the sailors were trying to do that. But look who takes over. The soldiers take over. They cut the ropes of the ship's boat and let it go. Off it goes into the middle of nowhere. Now they don't have one. And it's just them and this boat and a bunch of unhappy sailors. You know, sometimes I think we come up with our own second plan, a backdoor escape plan, but for selfish reasons. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have option A, B, and C when you're going on a trip. Always have a way to maybe make an adjustment if you need to. But this one was selfish. This plan was not considering others. It was just for themselves. Do I have a lifeboat or a separate plan, a selfish backup plan, to just relieve myself of my lack of faith that I need to get rid of and cut it loose? I don't know. Maybe you do. I'd like to invite our worship team to come up at this time. Point number 3 this morning is this: take heart. Paul said it a couple times. Take heart. There will be no loss of life, except the whole ship is going to run aground on some island. But here they are. They've been out for 2 weeks at sea. And a couple sailors or a few sailors decide we're going to save ourselves and pretty much down the boat. But the soldiers, they discover it. The soldiers cut that boat loose, and now they're back to just having to figure it out. How do we apply this morning and wrap this up? Folks, we need to take heart. We need to cut loose those selfish backup plans, because what we aren't going to see this morning is the end of this story. It's kind of the cliffhanger. We got more to go. Of course, you could read your Bible. You know, it's in there. But it's kind of fun to walk through this story. Where are you at in whatever journey you're on? Has fear caused you to calculate backup plans? Your faith is waning and you need to take heart. Would you stand this morning with me? Folks, we need to be aware of what's going on around us. We need to understand that our plans don't always end up going that way. We need to trust that missions have to be flexible. We need to listen to warnings. People around us might be sharing with us, might have been smarter to just hang out there in that harbor and look for God's hand in our circumstances. But don't abandon hope. Don't abandon hope of God's rescue, God's answer. Because whatever situation you're in right now, God may have allowed it to happen or even guided you into it, and you weren't aware. You're looking at it thinking, God hates me. God thinks I'm awful. And he might be saying, actually, no, I've just got a plan. Just take a break, take a minute, and trust me, take heart. What is it you need to take heart in this morning? I'd like the worship team to go ahead and start to play, because I want to encourage you this morning. If you have lost hope, you need to take heart, then I want to encourage you to come forward for prayer. Because you might be in desperation. You might be coming up with wild and crazy things. You're planning to jettison everything. I'm throwing everything out because I just need to survive. And God's going, I've got you. Take heart. But you need an encouragement this morning. This area, I want you to encourage you to come and pray if you just want to pray with the Lord, you and Jesus. If you want someone to join with you in prayer, come over here. We're here to pray with you. But some of us here this morning, you're on a journey. It's not a happy one. It's something you didn't plan, but you're on it. God wants you to take heart. Doesn't want you to lose hope. Doesn't want you to abandon hope of rescue. So let's come before him this morning. Trust him for it. Leave it with him, because there is an end to the story. Come if you would.